It was supposed to be a routine drill. Just a quiet morning patrol around the old Key West port, nothing unusual, nothing to raise a badge or bark. But when K-9 Scout suddenly broke formation and launched himself toward a shuttered storage unit near Pier 7, Officer Colby Hayes knew something wasn't right. The dog wasn't chasing a rat or sniffing for explosives. No, this was different. Scout was digging, and what he uncovered didn't belong in any drug bust file. It belonged to a missing child case buried 10 years deep. The sun hadn't fully crested the Florida coastline when Colby parked his department-issued SUV near the rusted gates of the old cruise terminal. The place hadn't been operational in nearly a decade. Hurricanes and corporate relocations had turned the port into little more than a ghost town. But it was still part of the sheriff's jurisdiction, and every few months, Colby brought Scout along to stretch his legs and sniff out any signs of vagrancy or drug drop-offs. Scout, a 6-year-old German shepherd, wasn't just a K-9 officer, he was Colby's partner in every sense of the word. They'd served together for 4 years and had an unspoken rhythm. Colby spoke, Scout listened. Scout sniffed, Colby trusted. But that morning, something broke their rhythm. They were barely 10 minutes into their sweep when Scout's ears perked. His body tensed like a drawn bow, and then, he lunged. Not toward the fence line or the garbage pile, but toward an old gray shipping container with a faded label, Royal Monarch Cruises, Inventory C. Scout! Colby barked, trying to rein him in. The dog ignored him, rare for Scout, and pawed furiously at a rust-stained corner of the container. His claws scraped against the metal, then shifted to the dirt, where he began digging like something lived beneath it. Colby approached cautiously, one hand on his sidearm, the other steadying the leash. "Easy, buddy. What do you smell?" Scout let out a short, sharp bark and began to dig again. Moments later, his snout nosed into the earth and pulled something out, a small, metallic object caked in soil and salt. Colby squatted and brushed it off. It was a child's heart-shaped locket, silver, dulled with age. On the back, engraved in delicate script, were the initials, E.J. A cold breeze blew off the ocean as Colby stared at it. This place hadn't been used since at least 2013. What in God's name was a child's necklace doing here? Back at the station, Colby handed the locket to forensics. He logged the coordinates, wrote up a report, and tried to put it aside. Just a trinket. Maybe lost by some kid before the port closed down. Nothing actionable. Probably nothing at all. But Scout wouldn't let it go. The next day, when they passed the same route, Scout whined and tugged toward the container again. On the third day, he growled low as they drove by, staring at the spot through the SUV's rear window. By day 4, Colby gave in. He returned to the site, unlocked the chain securing the container door, and stepped inside with Scout leading the way. The air smelled like rust and rot. Old cruise supplies, sun-faded towels, corroded metal racks, a stack of plastic bins, lay covered in layers of dust. Nothing out of place, nothing criminal. Until Scout went still. His nose pointed toward a far corner, tail rigid, ears locked forward. Colby followed. Buried beneath a pile of molded beach bags was a cardboard shipping box half destroyed by humidity. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a tattered child's sandal. Purple. Glittery. Tiny. And on the sole, just visible in faded ink, E.J. Colby's breath caught. He placed a quick call to dispatch. "This is Deputy Hayes. I've got a possible link to a cold case. Requesting access to missing persons archives. Keyword, Royal Monarch Cruises. Year range, 2012 to 2014. Look for initials E.J. While he waited, he stared at the shoe in his gloved hand. Who had left this here? Why? And why was Scout, of all dogs, so determined to find it? 2 hours later, an email popped up in Colby's inbox from archives. Attached was a scanned missing person flyer. Name, Emily Jensen. Age at time of disappearance, 8. Date, March 15, 2013. Location, aboard the Royal Monarch cruise ship, sailing from Key West. Case status, presumed deceased, disappearance ruled accidental, no remains recovered. Colby leaned back in his chair. Scout sat at his side, tail still, eyes alert. "You found her, didn't you?" he whispered. Scout didn't move. He didn't need to. He already knew. The next morning, Colby pulled the cold case file from the archives, dusty, frayed, nearly forgotten. The report said Emily disappeared while on vacation with her family. Last seen walking alone to the restroom near the children's splash deck. Surveillance footage showed her heading toward a staff-only corridor. No footage after that. No alarm triggered. No body ever recovered. The ship continued its cruise. No one was ever charged. The case had gone cold. Buried, just like that locket. Colby flipped to the final page. A note from the original investigator read, "Unconfirmed staff record discrepancy. One crew member terminated shortly after incident. Name redacted." Scout let out a soft growl. Colby narrowed his eyes. "You want to chase ghosts, partner? Fine. Let's see what they left behind." He slipped the flyer into his vest pocket and headed back out, with Scout beside him, tail high, ready to hunt. Scout's nails clicked against the floor of the sheriff's office like a ticking clock, sharp and steady. He paced in circles beside Colby's desk, ears up, head low, tail stiff, not restless, but focused, as if he still smelled something no one else could. Colby watched him with one eye while flipping through the cold case file. It wasn't just a dog's hunch anymore. Something was wrong with this story. The official report on Emily Jensen's disappearance was full of missing pages and phrases like, "no evidence of foul play," and "likely accidental fall." The investigators had focused on overboard theories, despite zero camera footage, no distress calls, and no confirmed location from which she could have fallen. Scout gave a low growl and sat abruptly beside the open folder. "Yeah," Colby muttered, "I don't buy it either." Colby didn't waste time. That afternoon, he placed a call to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They confirmed the Jensen case had remained unsolved for over a decade. No DNA, no suspects. Nothing ever stuck. But something nagged at Colby, the redacted name in the final report. A cruise employee terminated days after Emily vanished. No charges filed. No further investigation. Back in his patrol vehicle, Colby logged into the department's database. He typed, "Royal Monarch Crew Manifest, March 2013. The list loaded slow. There were dozens of names, but one stood out, Martin Gaines, Children's Activities Coordinator. Colby ran a background check. Gaines had no known address, no driver's license activity in the last 7 years. No employment history past 2014. Just, vanished. Scout sat up in the passenger seat and whined softly. "I know, Bud," Colby said. "We're chasing shadows." But Scout didn't look like he was chasing anything. He looked like he was following something real. Later that night, Colby met with a quiet figure in a cafe just outside town, Noah Jensen, Emily's older brother. Now in his late 20s, Noah looked worn but sharp. Black-rimmed glasses. A laptop bag always strapped across his shoulder. He hadn't stopped searching for his sister since the day she disappeared. In fact, he'd studied computer science specifically to learn digital tracking and surveillance tools. "My parents," Noah began, stirring black coffee, "they eventually accepted the cruise's version of events. Said I had to let go. But I never could. Emily didn't fall off that ship. She was taken." Colby slid the locket and the child's sandal across the table. Noah's hand trembled. "That's hers," he whispered, eyes fixed on the locket. "My dad gave her that for her 8th birthday. Custom engraving." Colby nodded. "Scout found it 4 days ago in an abandoned cruise storage container. We also found a staff ID badge buried under false flooring at the Old Maritime Museum." Noah leaned in. "You think it's Gaines?" "Maybe. Or maybe someone who knew him." Noah's expression shifted. He reached into his bag and pulled out a battered manila folder. Inside were dozens of screenshots, printouts, face progression models. He laid them out like tarot cards. "I've been running facial recognition on old cruise photos, alumni directories, even church rosters. I also built a scraping bot that crawls public Facebook data using Emily's age, facial markers, and voiceprint approximations. Last year I found a girl in Tallahassee. The image match was 83%. He slid the photo forward. A teenage girl with long brown hair, wide hazel eyes, and a hesitant smile. Colby stared. She looked like someone he'd seen before. "She goes by Madeline Rose Mitchell," Noah said. "Adopted. No school records prior to 2006. Mother's name is Rosa. No father listed." "And you never sent this to the authorities?" Colby asked. "I did. They told me I didn't have enough proof. Just a kid who looked like my sister." Colby closed the folder. "Well, I've got a federal badge, a K-9 with an attitude problem, and a hunch that won't quit. Let's pay Tallahassee a visit." The drive north took 6 hours. Scout curled in the back seat but barely slept. Every time they passed a road marker, he perked up, as if they were getting closer to something only he understood. They arrived in Tallahassee just before dawn. Colby didn't go straight to the girl's house. That would have raised too many red flags. Instead, he drove to the local high school where Madeline was reportedly enrolled. He parked across the street and waited. At 7:22 a.m., a silver sedan pulled into the student lot. A woman in her late 40s stepped out, Rosa Mitchell. Moments later, a teen girl emerged from the passenger side. Scout's head shot up. He pressed his snout to the window, ears locked on the girl, his body tensed like a live wire. Colby narrowed his eyes. The girl laughed at something Rosa said, but her body language was distant, arms crossed, eyes down. She didn't look comfortable. She didn't look like someone used to being seen. She looked like someone who had learned to hide. They watched her all week. No contact. No confrontation. Colby filed a quiet request for school enrollment records. As Noah suspected, there was nothing before 2006. The adoption file was sealed. Rosa worked part-time at a dental clinic. No husband. No family listed. Everything was just enough. On Thursday, Colby made his move. He brought Scout to the park where Madeline jogged after school. Casual. No patrol car. No badge. Just him and his dog. Scout didn't hesitate. As Madeline passed by, Scout broke from his heel and jogged beside her, tail low, head tilted. She slowed down and glanced at him. Then she stopped. Scout sat in front of her, staring into her eyes. Madeline froze. Colby stepped up behind him. "Sorry, he doesn't usually do that. You okay?" She nodded but didn't speak. Her hand slowly reached toward Scout's head. He didn't flinch. She pet him once, twice. "He feels familiar," she murmured. "That's weird, right?" Colby kept his tone light. "Dogs have a good memory. Maybe he's picked up your scent before." Madeline smiled, faint and distracted. "I used to have dreams about a dog. A big German shepherd. I was a little girl, and we lived near the water. My brother used to carry me on his shoulders. Colby exchanged a glance with Scout. She looked down again. But I guess that was just a dream. Colby forced a smile. Maybe. Or maybe some memories just take longer to wake up. The morning was unusually quiet when Officer Colby Hayes stepped out of the SUV, coffee in hand, staring up at the old Maritime Museum off Truman Avenue. Scout sat beside him in the passenger seat, ears perked, tail still, gaze locked on the aging building like it owed him something. The museum was once a proud exhibit of Florida's cruise line history, a favorite school field trip stop for local kids. Now, it was just another underfunded piece of nostalgia, open on weekends and run by volunteers who mostly spent their time battling mildew and rats. But buried in one of its halls was what Colby needed, a reconstructed section of the Royal Monarch, built to scale for educational purposes. Deck 9. The same level Emily Jensen had disappeared from a decade ago. Colby hadn't said a word to Scout about their destination. Still, the second the back door of the SUV opened, Scout leapt out and pulled hard toward the museum entrance. That's when Colby knew they were onto something. Inside, the building smelled like damp rope and sun-bleached wood. A retired Coast Guard officer manned the front desk, half reading a copy of Field and Stream. "We're closed today," the man said without looking up. Colby flashed his badge. "Sheriff's office. I called yesterday." The man squinted at the badge, then at Scout, who had already started sniffing along the baseboards. "Dog sniffing for drugs?" "No," Colby replied. "Something older." The replica cruise deck was just past the submarine periscope exhibit, a mock-up complete with artificial portholes, faded signage, and even a replica kid splash pad made from foam tiles and peeling paint. Most folks walked through the hallway in 5 minutes flat. But Scout? He went still halfway through. Right in front of a fake wall panel labeled "Crew Only." Then, in a single motion, he pawed twice at the base and let out a deep, guttural bark. Colby stepped forward, kneeling beside him. "Easy, boy. What is it?" Scout whined, then pressed his snout against a barely visible seam in the wood. It looked decorative, just part of the display. But Colby noticed that the bottom corner had been pried loose, just a bit. He slipped on a pair of gloves and pulled at the panel. It popped off with a screech of old nails. Behind it was a hollow cavity filled with dust and spider webs. And inside that, shoved all the way in the back, was a thin rectangle wrapped in old duct tape. Colby's pulse spiked. He pulled the object free, unwrapping it carefully. A Royal Monarch Cruise staff badge, faded and cracked. The name printed on it, Martin Gaines. He didn't recognize the name. Not yet. But Scout leaned forward and gave a low, menacing growl the second Colby read it aloud. Back at the sheriff's office, the lab confirmed 2 things within 24 hours. 1. The cruise badge was authentic. Martin Gaines had been a children's activity coordinator aboard the Royal Monarch for 4 years. His employment ended suddenly, just 1 week after Emily Jensen vanished. 2. DNA on the badge didn't belong to Gaines. It matched Emily Jensen. Not in the system. But it matched the dried skin cells found on the locket Scout had uncovered a week earlier. 2 items. Same profile. Same girl. Colby sat back in his chair, staring at the evidence laid out before him. Emily had been there. Her skin. Her belongings. Her path had run directly through Gaines. Yet, somehow, no one had ever tied him to the disappearance. He typed the name into the law enforcement database. Martin D. Gaines. Age, 42. Last known address, Tampa, Florida. No active warrants. No criminal record. But, a footnote at the bottom caught his eye. Flagged an internal cruise line HR memo, 2013 subject dismissed for policy violation involving passenger interaction. No charges filed. File sealed. Colby muttered under his breath. You've got to be kidding me. Scout sat quietly beside him, head resting against the desk, but his eyes said it all. Don't stop now. Colby needed help, and he knew exactly who to call. Noah Jensen answered on the second ring. Yeah. It's Colby. We found something. You found her? Not exactly. But we're getting closer. He explained everything, the locket, the sandal, the badge, the sealed HR file. Noah didn't speak for a long while. Then, I think I know who she is. Colby froze. What do you mean? I've been tracking profiles. Using facial recognition software I built. I've got a list of over 3,000 possibilities across social platforms. Most are dead ends. But one of them looks just like her. Same bone structure. Same ears. Eyes. You have a name? Yeah. She goes by Madeline Rose Mitchell. Lives in Tallahassee. High school senior. Adopted. Colby frowned. You sure it's not just a look-alike? No. I compared her face to the last known photo of Emily using 22 facial points. The match is 89%. That's higher than most FBI reconstructions. Scout lifted his head at the tension in Colby's voice. I need an address, Colby said. I'll send it now. 2 days later, Colby drove north, Scout in the back seat, nose to the air the whole way. Tallahassee was calm and green, a far cry from the humidity and salt of Key West. Colby didn't notify local police. Not yet. He wasn't ready to share what they'd found, not without being absolutely sure. The address led to a quiet street near a high school campus. The home was small, well-kept, with wind chimes on the porch and flower boxes in the windows. Rosa Mitchell. The name on the deed. Adopted Madeline in 2007. No prior adoptions. No criminal record. Colby parked across the street and waited. And then, just before 4 p.m., the front door opened. A teenage girl stepped out. She had long brown hair. A blue backpack slung over one shoulder. A tired but bright smile as she said something to a friend on the phone. Scout stood up in the back seat. He pressed his snout to the window. Then, without a sound, he started wagging his tail. Colby sat there, motionless. If Scout recognized her, if after all this time he knew. He didn't say a word. He just reached for his phone. Noah, he whispered. I think you were right. The parking lot outside Gulf Meadow High School buzzed with end-of-day activity, teenagers streaming through doors, backpacks slung low, phones out, music playing. But Officer Colby Hayes wasn't there for crowd control or truancy calls. He sat behind the wheel of an unmarked vehicle across the street, windows slightly cracked, eyes fixed on the front entrance. In the passenger seat, Scout sat upright and still, his black and tan coat gleaming in the fading Florida sun. His ears were perked, nose twitching every so often like he was tasting the air. They were here on a hunch, a long shot built from fragments, facial recognition leads, and the relentless instincts of a brother who never gave up. Colby hadn't told local authorities. Not yet. He wasn't ready to call this official. Not until he was certain. And Scout was about to make that call for him. The school bell rang. Students spilled out. Laughter, shouts, the screech of sneakers on pavement. Colby's heart ticked faster with every passing face. Then, Scout growled. A low, quiet sound. Not aggressive. Not fearful. It was his, I know something you don't, sound. Colby followed the dog's gaze. She was walking alone, earbuds in, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Jeans, a faded hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder. A girl like any other. Except she looked like Emily Jensen, age progressed by a decade. Colby's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Scout let out one sharp bark. The girl froze. Right there on the sidewalk, she dropped her coffee. Her head turned, slowly, uncertainly, and her eyes locked with Scout's through the windshield. Colby stepped out of the car. The girl blinked, stepped back. "Is that a police dog?" "Yes, ma'am," Colby said gently. "His name's Scout." Scout was already outside, pacing slowly toward her, tail lowered in curiosity, not threat. The girl didn't flinch. In fact, she stepped toward him. When she reached out a hand, Scout leaned his head into her palm like he'd known her all his life. Colby saw it then, the shift in her posture, the flicker of recognition she didn't understand. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She looked up. "Madeline. Madeline Rose Mitchell." Colby gave a soft nod. "Mind if I ask you a few questions, Madeline? It's not about you being in trouble. It's something important." She hesitated. "Did something happen?" "Not recently. But maybe something long ago." Back at the sheriff's substation, Madeline sat across from Colby in a quiet interview room, sipping water. Scout rested at her feet. Colby slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printout of a missing persons flyer, worn at the corners, photocopied too many times. The little girl in the photo was beaming, hair in braids, her name printed in bold, Emily Jensen. Madeline stared at it. "I don't," she began, then paused. "She looks familiar." Colby watched her carefully. "We think you might be her." "What?" "No," she said, laughing nervously. "That's not possible. I've always been Madeline Mitchell. I live with my mom. Rosa. Can I show you something else?" He pulled out a flash drive, loaded it into the laptop. A grainy home video played. A little girl in a bright pink swimsuit ran through a splash deck on a cruise ship. She turned toward the camera and shouted, "Noah. Watch this." Madeline gasped. "That voice," she whispered. I've heard it before." "It's your voice," Colby said. "We believe that's you. On a cruise ship. March 2013. You disappeared that same day." She looked dazed. "I've had dreams. About water. Big ships. A woman calling me Emily. I thought I made them up." Colby nodded. "What do you remember about before Rosa?" "Not much. I thought I came to live with her when I was really little. I've never seen pictures of myself before age 10. There are none in the house. She always said she lost them in a fire." Scout nudged her knee gently. Madeline looked down. "He's so calm." "He's part of how we found you," Colby said. "Scout recognized you the moment he saw you." Her voice was small. "So, what now?" While Colby stepped out to make a call to Noah Jensen, Scout stayed in the room with Madeline. She sat quietly, scrolling through photos on the laptop, images of a childhood she didn't remember, of parents and a brother who had never stopped searching. In the hallway, Colby gave Noah a full update. There was a long pause on the other end. "Are you sure?" Noah finally asked, his voice tight with emotion. "I can't give you 100% until we run the DNA, but, yeah, I'm sure." "And Scout's sure." "Does she know?" "She's starting to. It's not hitting all at once. But I've seen enough reunifications to know this one's going to be hard. She's been raised with a different name, a different life. Rosa's not some monster, but she's involved. We'll get the full story soon." Later that night, Colby sat with Madeline in a side room of the station. He handed her a phone. "Someone wants to say hello." "Hello?" she said into the receiver. "Hi," a man's voice said. "My name's Noah. I think I think I'm your brother." She didn't say anything for several seconds. Then, softly, "I remember someone named Noah. From my dreams. You used to carry me on your back." "I did. All the time," he whispered. "I think I'm Emily." "I know you are." She covered her mouth and began to cry. Scout rested his head on her knee again. Outside the station, the Florida night was quiet. Colby leaned against his cruiser, looking up at the stars. Scout stood beside him, tail gently wagging. "You did good, buddy," he said. "You found her. And you didn't even need a warrant." Scout let out a short, proud bark. They weren't done, not yet. Rosa still needed to be questioned. DNA confirmation had to be processed. And somewhere out there, Martin Gaines, former crew staffer and prime suspect, was still unaccounted for. But tonight, they had a name. A face. A girl who never should have disappeared. And a dog who wouldn't stop until she was found. The house was small and neat, tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac in Tallahassee. Roses bloomed along the white picket fence, and wind chimes jingled softly in the breeze. On the surface, it looked like the American dream, a safe home, a well-kept yard, and a woman who worked a steady job as a dental assistant. But Officer Colby Hayes had learned the hard way, appearances often lied. He parked a few houses down. Scout sat upright in the passenger seat, his ears perked, nose twitching. He knew where they were, Rosa Mitchell's house. The woman who had raised Madeline for nearly 10 years. The woman who claimed to love her like a daughter, even if the paperwork said otherwise. "Ready, boy?" Colby said quietly, clipping on Scout's leash. The dog gave a soft huff, almost like an answer. They approached the door, unannounced. Rosa answered before he could knock, as if she'd been expecting someone. Her face froze when she saw the badge. "I think we need to talk," Colby said gently. She stepped aside without a word. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. Inside, the house was warm and filled with soft light. Family photos lined the hallway. Madeline, Emily, was in almost every one. Colby took note, no photos before 2010. No toddler years. No baby pictures. Scout padded silently beside him, sniffing the corners, pausing near a closed bedroom door. He whined once, low and drawn out. "That's her room," Rosa whispered, sitting down at the kitchen table. "Madeline's. Or. I guess her name is Emily." "You knew?" Colby asked, voice low. Rosa nodded slowly, eyes misting. "Not at first. Not for sure. But I had suspicions, years ago." Colby sat across from her. "Start from the beginning." "It began in the spring of 2004, Rosa explained. She was living in Miami at the time, freshly divorced and grieving after multiple failed IVF treatments. Children had always been a dream she couldn't reach, until she met Martin Gaines, a cruise ship employee who claimed to have temporary custody of a little girl who'd lost her mother in a car crash. He told me her name was Bella. Said her mom died while they were on vacation. He couldn't care for her long-term because he worked at sea. Asked if I could take her in just for a while, a few months." Rosa swallowed hard. She was quiet at first, scared. But sweet. So sweet. And after a while, she started calling me Mom. I didn't have the heart to send her back. Martin kept delaying. Eventually, he stopped coming altogether. "You filed for adoption," Colby said. "But the documents were sketchy. I used what he gave me. I didn't know they were fake. Not at first. But by the time I realized, she was calling me Mom, and we had a life together. I told myself I was protecting her." Colby didn't respond immediately. He looked toward the hallway. Scout was sitting quietly now, his head resting on his paws outside the bedroom door. "She ever say anything about a family? Before you?" Rosa nodded. "She used to cry at night. Said she missed her brother. Noah," she'd whisper. "Where's Noah?" I told her maybe he was in heaven with her mom. I didn't know what else to say. Colby leaned forward. "Rosa, did you know she was reported missing from a cruise ship off Key West in March 2004? Rosa's lips trembled. "I know now. I looked it up 3 years ago. Her face popped up in an old database when I was renewing her insurance. I knew right then who she really was." "And you didn't come forward?" "I wanted to," Rosa whispered. "But how do you tell a child the life she knows is a lie? How do you break her heart and lose her at the same time?" Colby exhaled through his nose, unsure if he felt pity or anger. "So you kept her?" "I loved her," Rosa said, tears spilling over now. "Not because she was stolen. Because she was mine, in every way that mattered. But I never stopped fearing someone would come. I suppose now you have." Scout let out a low, mournful sound from the hallway. At the sheriff's office that evening, Colby sat across from Noah Jensen in the observation room. Rosa had agreed to a formal interview and signed a written statement admitting to having harbored Emily, though she insisted she hadn't known the full truth at the time of the adoption. "She broke the law," Noah said, his jaw clenched. "But she also raised my sister. I don't even know what to feel." "You don't have to feel just one thing," Colby replied. "It's okay to feel everything." Scout lay at Noah's feet, resting but alert. Noah reached down and absently stroked the dog's back. "You know she never let me go," he murmured. "All these years, Scout, she remembered me." Colby stood up. "That memory's what kept her alive. And what'll bring her home." Later that night, Colby stopped by Rosa's house one last time. The lights were dim. Madeline, Emily, was in her room, packing a small overnight bag. A court-appointed psychologist would be arriving the next morning. Rosa stood in the doorway, clutching a tissue. "She's scared," she whispered. "She doesn't know where she belongs." "She belongs with the truth," Colby said gently. "That's where healing starts." As he turned to leave, Scout paused at the base of the porch steps and looked back. He let out a short whine, his tail wagging slowly. Then he trotted up to Rosa and licked her hand once, soft, forgiving. Rosa broke down in quiet sobs as Colby led Scout back to the car. Back at his desk, Colby opened the original missing persons file for Emily Jensen one more time. The photograph, big brown eyes, dark hair in braids, seemed to smile back at him with childlike innocence. The girl in that photo had vanished 10 years ago without a trace. And now, thanks to a dog who refused to forget, she was finally coming home. The Florida sunrise painted the horizon with streaks of peach and gold as Officer Colby Hayes parked outside the modest White House on Magnolia Street. It was the same house where the Jensen family had once lived, and where Scout now sat quietly on the porch, his gaze fixed on the driveway like a soldier waiting for orders. But for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't searching. He was waiting for Emily Jensen to come home. Inside, the mood was thick with a quiet kind of anticipation. Dolores and Robert Jensen sat at the dining table, hands clasped tightly. A box of tissues rested between them, already half empty. Across the room, Noah paced the hardwood floor, his phone buzzing every few minutes with messages from the agents handling the case. And then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Colby opened the door, and there she was. Emily. 18 years old now. Not the little girl in pigtails whose face had once been printed on missing person posters. She was taller, her eyes a shade more guarded, her voice uncertain, but she was here. Scout stepped forward before anyone else could move. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail. He simply approached her, sat, and looked up. Emily knelt down slowly. "Hi," she whispered. "Do you remember me?" Scout licked her hand. And just like that, she began to cry. The first hours were hard. Reunion isn't always a joyous slam of emotions, sometimes, it's a quiet collapse. Memories collided, some real, some lost in the haze of childhood trauma. Emily sat with her parents in the living room, Colby nearby, Scout stretched out at her feet. They talked about small things at first, school, music, the names of her friends. Then came the tougher subjects, Rosa, the false memories, the dreams she used to have of water and sunlight and someone calling her Em. But it was Noah who made her smile. He pulled out the old home videos he had transferred to digital years ago. One of them showed little Emily racing Scout around the backyard, shrieking with laughter as the dog galloped after her, tail wagging. "I thought those were dreams," she said quietly, tears running down her cheeks. "They were memories," Dolores whispered. "We never stopped believing you'd come back." In the weeks that followed, things didn't return to normal, because normal no longer existed. But the Jensen family, like so many before them, learned to redefine what healing looked like. Emily, who had legally been named Madeline Rose Mitchell for the last decade, chose to restore her original name, but asked the court to keep Rose as her middle name. She said it was her way of honoring the woman who raised her, even if that love had been born from a terrible lie. Rosa cooperated fully with the investigation and, after a detailed psychological evaluation, was sentenced to probation and mandatory community service. Her cooperation, along with evidence that she had not been involved in the abduction itself, spared her prison time. She and Emily agreed to stay in contact, but with boundaries. Martin Gaines, the man who had taken Emily from that cruise ship corridor and falsified records to keep her hidden, was extradited from Guatemala and faced federal charges including child abduction, fraud, and conspiracy. In court, he showed no remorse. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Back in Key West, Scout was awarded the Medal of Valor by the Sheriff's Department. During the small ceremony, as Colby accepted the medal on Scout's behalf, he said only this: "Some dogs follow orders. Others follow their instincts. Scout didn't just sniff out a crime. He found a person. He found hope." The room rose to their feet in applause. But Scout? He just sat there, tongue out, like none of it mattered. Because to him, it wasn't about awards or headlines. It was about bringing someone home. By the time fall rolled around, Emily had made a big decision. After graduating early from her high school program in Tallahassee, she applied and was accepted to the University of Florida, majoring in child psychology. "I want to help kids like me," she said during an interview with a local newspaper. "Not just the ones who go missing, but the ones who come back." She spent weekends in Key West with her family, holidays with both the Jensens and Rosa. Scout always greeted her like no time had passed, resting his head in her lap while she told stories about campus life, therapy sessions, and the strange freedom that came with finally knowing who you really are. As for Colby, he still patrolled the old cruise terminals now and then, just out of habit. Scout, officially retired, still rode shotgun. And sometimes, on slow evenings, Colby would glance over and say, "You still remember that day, don't you?" Scout would look back at him, eyes sharp, as if to say, "Of course I do. I never forgot. Thank you for following this incredible journey." The story of K-9 Scout, Officer Colby, and Emily Jensen reminds us that justice isn't always swift, but with perseverance, love, and instinct, the truth always has a way of surfacing. Now we want to hear from you. Backhand index pointing right. Do you believe dogs like Scout can sense what humans can't? Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if someone you loved went missing for 10 years? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you believe in the power of loyalty, family, and never giving up. Paw Prints, United States.